Hello, welcome to today's webinar on Played by Gamification, moving beyond points and badges to drive real engagement in online learning. My name is Bybee, and I'm excited to join you today. So the idea for this webinar came actually from an event that my colleague Drew and I presented at just a couple of weeks ago called Focus on Learning. And the event was really focused on exactly this, how to drive engagement in learning through games, mobile, and social. And we wanted to kind of present an alternative view around gamification, not to say that it's good or bad, but rather to focus on how it can be used effectively. So what I want to cover today is we'll do a quick introduction, want to get to know everyone on the line. I designed this presentation to be very engaging because it was originally done in person. And so we're going to experiment with a couple of different tactics in webinar format. So please be prepared to jump in and participate. We do have some polls that you'll see on your kind of dashboard there. We also have a number of questions that you can answer and respond to, so please jump in. And I have colleagues here with me that will help moderate. And then we're going to do a collaborative brainstorming exercise with a virtual whiteboard as well. So looking forward to trying these out. So after we get to know each other, we'll cover a little bit about andragogy, the basics of adult learning, and then move from there into motivation and engagement. What do we know about driving engagement? What's the science behind it, and how can we transition that to gamification? So we'll talk about the principles of gamification, what we've learned from game designers, some of the science behind that from social psychologists, and then really the crux, which is, given all of this, therefore what? How do we drive engagement in online learning, leveraging what we just learned about andragogy, engagement, and gamification? So as a quick introduction on myself, my name is Bybee, and I'm the head of customer experience at NovoEd. And that includes our professional services team, learning design team, as well as customer success and account management, as well as marketing and business development. And my background is really in education technology. I spent some time consulting around the future of learning, was a product manager at Coursera, did education business development at Ryan in China, did some investing in New Schools Venture Fund, before I landed at NovoEd, where I've been for about 4 years now in a variety of roles from product to marketing, biz dev, and learning solutions. So I really love this space. I have a master's in education. I sit on the board of a charter school, do a lot of advising in this space. But with me, I have someone who knows even more about the science behind learning, one of our lead instructional designers. So let me have Drew introduce himself.
Thanks, Greg. My name is Drew Remaker. I'm here, excited to be here with Greg. My career in education started as a middle school teacher in the Bronx, where I earned my master's of education in the City of College of New York, and I've been at NovoEd for about 2.5 years, designing a variety of courses from working with IDEO to Nestle to a variety of customers, and excited to be here today and offer my perspective.
So Drew will be on the line. He'll be monitoring the polls and the questions, so feel free to jump in at any time, and he'll interrupt as needed, and he'll also answer some directly. So I want to know about you guys. So we have a poll, and if you could let me know sort of which category best describes your role, and I know for a number of you it may be multiple. Are you an instructional designer? Are you a teacher or facilitator, so you're really at the front of the classroom? Are you in a different learning function, whether it be operations or analytics, or somewhere else in HR? It could be talent management, and I'll sort of leave it to you to decide where that falls, recruiting, or another business role. So feel free to fill out the survey now. Excellent, thank you. Oh, good. So we have, it looks like about a little over a third, or 40%, are instructional designers. About 40% are instructional designers, 16% facilitators, leaders of the classroom, 27% other learning, 4% HR, 14% other. Excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to lean on the teachers, facilitators, instructional designers in the room to contribute, to challenge, and to add their perspectives. And same with the sort of HR, learning, and other business functions. Would love to get your perspective around sort of the business impact. Why does this matter? I mean, everyone should contribute with their background. So let's start with the basics. You know, the whole point of driving engagement, the whole point of gamification of online learning is really about driving learning outcomes. So I want you to take a moment and this new kind of online tool we're trying out to answer the question, what makes for an effective adult learning experience? So brainstorm the hows, the what's around tactics. What are the underlying methods? And so these could be principles or science, or it could be best practices. And we'll sort of take a moment and follow along and help group and moderate, and then we'll share that out with the group. I feel like we need some Jeopardy music.
You'll also notice the link to this Padlet is in the chat section of the webinar, so feel free to link it right there, and then add your thoughts. What makes for an effective adult learning experience? Oh, it's getting populated now.
Oh, excellent. I see quite a few coming in here. So I'll just read some of the ideas as they come in as my colleague tries to kind of group them. So we got consideration of learner's time, broadly applicable. I actually see a couple points around applicability to focus on why, what it matters. Choice as well, so I think that also relates to both applicability, but also sort of some autonomy components, choosing your own path, being able to apply. Some comments around scaffolding, constructive feedback, learning that continues beyond the event, right? So learning shouldn't be a single event. It should be continuous and ongoing. Well, here's some on interaction and application, another one on engaging and applicable. Relevant and realistic, so lots there. Choice, okay, lots, definitely some themes around choice here. Let's put those together. Here we go, social construction of knowledge. Love it. We have some, what I call connectivists and some constructivists here. Experiential, adaptive, problem-based. There's kind of a similar. Another one on interaction, engaging. I'm going to put in the bottom right here all the relevant.
Yes, nice.
And the upper right, sort of interaction, social.
Yep.
Upper left, some sort of
choice.
Yeah, choice, autonomy, and maybe lower right, some kind of other.
There's people are talking about feedback as well.
Oh, here we go. Just in time drives the path, not the instructional designer. So I'll put that around choice, autonomy. Although just in time also kind of fits to relevance. Maybe that goes in the middle. What I kind of like is we could almost make a 2x2 dimension, and you can see here how they sort of flow from one to the other.
Active engagement, scaffolding, applying in the non-academic world.
Okay. An instructor who creates the learning experience in the learner's context. Yeah, a lot around context.
Giving them feedback. So that's another big theme, I think, is feedback we're seeing. Peer learning, social construction knowledge.
Okay, excellent. Well, you feel free to keep going. You'll have access to this long after the webinar. I'll leave it up as long as I can, so you can have the link. But it looks like there's a couple themes, one around choice and autonomy, one around interaction, engaging, and social, one around relevant, applied, real world, and then there's a couple here around constructivist, connectivist, scaffolding, some other kind of pedagogical principles around coherence, everything connects. So yeah, very, very good. So let me share kind of what we came up with. And I'll actually start with Malcolm Knowles, who's sort of one of the thought leaders in the principles of andragogy. And I think a lot of you clearly have read his work, because a lot of his points, actually, you should have used these same quadrant. I mean, this is really impressive that it really aligned to these similar ones. So the first is involved adult learners, that adults have backgrounds, they have experiences, and you need to involve them in that process, not just in the learning itself, but also in the creation of the learning paths in terms of deciding the content. So there's also some autonomy pieces there. Engaging that experience that the learners have, adult learners have a lot of background that they bring, whereas for children learners or younger learners, you may be creating the first impression. For adults, the hard part is often changing impressions. You have to undo previous misconceptions. Relevance, it's in the same quadrant. Really making it impactful, focused. Adult learners actually have a desire to learn. There's in some ways less need to motivate, but more you need to tap into their existing motivation. And then problem-centered, which I think very much relates to that. So really, really great work. We did this ourselves, actually, maybe a couple of months back when we were preparing for this on the whiteboard, just sort of fresh slate as well. And came up with, here's some of the chicken scratch, but I've summarized it, what we came up with. Similar categories around engaging, constructivist and inquiry-driven, social and collaborative, to really focus on multiple perspectives, felt accountability, peer adaptivity, as well as some basic practices of curricular design, sequencing, scaffolding, chunking, coherence. So we thought it all came down to the need to be engaging, the need to be experiential, and the need to be coherent. So we'll sort of talk about those a little bit in the presentation. And the first assumption I want to make about gamification, and I certainly invite people to jump into the question box to make comments as well, but my assumption is when we talk about gamification, we're doing it in order to drive engagement. That of all those various components that gamification is doing, it's primarily focused on how to engage the learners. I'll pause in case there's any, doesn't seem like any vehement disagreement right now. Feel free to jump in. So what I want to think about is, well, what makes an engaging learning experience? And this is actually one of the ways we often talk about NovoEd, is to say, hey, think back to your experiences, whether it be undergrad, adult learning. Was it lecture, online course, or an in-person workshop? And what people always say is it's the in-person workshop. You're hands-on, you're working with peers, you're getting feedback, you're doing inquiry-based, problem-based learning, really working directly on something. And when they, even a non-kind of educator, when describing their best learning experience, will accidentally stumble on those exact principles that we just discussed when they're thinking about why a small in-person workshop works really well. But the challenge is this is really expensive. And as we talk to our clients, prospects, industry leaders, cost is definitely a driver. If everyone could fly in and get this experience, there wouldn't be such a challenge. But it's about $5,000 for a great in-person workshop. And if you look at the budgets of training in large corporations, this is a survey by Burson, senior executives and upper level about 10,000 above, mid-level around 5,000, and kind of individual contributors, entry level, are below 3,000. And the result is that only the top executives, maybe the top 10% of an organization, can really get that in-person coaching, in-person workshops. The rest of the organization is going to need something more scalable and cost-effective. The other piece that we're seeing is really a need to meet learners where they are. Individuals, adults today expect learning to be mobile, expect it to be flexible, when and where they need it. We talked about the cost, but it's particularly made more difficult now with globalization. Companies are around the world, and it's just not possible to bring everyone together into a single location, especially with the rise of the gig economy, the extended workforce, contractors. Especially in the US, there's a lot of legal requirements around training. And if you provide training, that's a condition for employment. But I really like to think about the bottom ones, which is becoming more agile, being able to deploy training more quickly, and reach the entire organization. I want to see 100% of the organization getting the same quality leadership development or customer service training as the top 10%. And part of what we've seen is the growth in online learning. It's been really strong, but it started to slow down. If you look kind of the middle, the right side is our forecast. But the middle side, we started to see the migration online slowing down. And part of the reason for that is the low-hanging fruit is sort of done. People started moving online with compliance training, with IT systems, with sort of basic facts, knowledge transfer. But now that that's done, and they're having trouble doing the higher order skills. And the reason for that is online learning looks like a lecture hall, which we sort of just at least assume that is not as engaging. Maybe you've got a really good, funny instructor, but you don't have a lot of social interaction. You don't have the hands-on project learning. It's too instructivist. It's too passive. And so what we really need to do with gamification as we design our online learning programs is to focus on how do we make online learning feel more like that workshop? How do we apply these principles of andragogy, and as we'll discuss engagement and gamification to replicate a really quality online learning environment. And quick pitch on NovoEd, that's really what we're focused on doing. So we build a platform that makes it possible to replicate the experience of great in-person learning online. So we support a wide range of engagement principles, have a modern UI that works across devices, really focused on social collaborative learning with teamwork and much more, as well as a great analytics platform to view the data. And what we'll be talking about today is what we've learned with our clients, implementing this, creating great learning programs. And so kind of a second assumption that you'll notice as we talk about gamification is we're going to be focusing more on the online piece. In person, I think there's a lot of great techniques that are applied to drive in-person engagement. But online is where we see gamification used, at least what I'm calling most bluntly. And that's where I'm going to focus most of the presentation or kind of conversation today. So let's talk about that. How do we drive engagement and motivation online? So first, I was trying to think about what is motivation, what is engagement, and the definition that I sort of postulate is that engagement is really about systematic, sustained motivation. So you engage people by motivating them, and engagement is sort of it's continuous. You have some feedback loop, something that keeps it going. And I found this GIF that I had to share, but it's really about finding something people want and making sure that it's continuous. And so that's what we're going to think about. And as we get to some of the gamification principles, you'll see how that ties in nicely with this idea of game loop. So one of the basic principles of motivation is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Essentially, at the bottom, you have the basic needs, physiological, food, sleep, water, you move up to safety. But it's the sort of middle and top part. It's connectedness, love, belonging, self-esteem, and this idea of self-actualization, that you're sort of doing things intrinsically for the love of themselves, for your own being. Now, I hear there's been recent updates to Maslow's hierarchy recently around adding in Wi-Fi and battery life into the hierarchy. But generally, people are trying to strive for the upper echelons here, for sort of inner creativity and fulfillment. And a most common sort of motivational dichotomy people drive is between extrinsic and intrinsic. But it's a little more complicated. It's a spectrum. And if you think about kind of intrinsic all the way on the right being fully self-determined, you're doing this because you really want to, and then there's shades, right? You're doing it because you see why it's important, because you value the outcome, but you may not value the input, to more external, so being outside determined. You're doing this because you're told to do it, or because you really don't have any choice. And what we've learned about this motivation is that different types of motivation work better for different types of learning and different types of tasks. And so Deci and Ryan, so Edward Deci was a professor of psychology and social science at the University of Rochester and the head of the human motivation program there with a PhD in social psychology from Carnegie Mellon. And Ryan's a professor at the Australian Catholic University, also with a PhD from University of Rochester in clinical psychology. And they dove into different motivational factors. And one of their findings that was most strong is that extrinsic motivation works really well, but also only works for non-creative, memorized tasks, repetitive tasks. So really sort of the lower order skills.
So more like policies and procedures, knowing that sort of thing is how you would describe it?
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side then, Eric Jensen, who is kind of the founder of the Jensen Learning Corp, has a master's in organizational development, a PhD in human development from Fielding Graduate University, and was a professor at National University, San Diego, a couple others. He's written a number of books on the topic. And he sort of found the flip side, which is that if you want people to focus on creativity, have higher self-interest, higher self-esteem, want them to be reflective, then you need to focus more on intrinsic motivations. And he starts to hint toward the point of avoiding reward systems that might be more extrinsic based. So there's a lot of research on this topic. I tried to pick a couple of my favorites. But if I had to summarize it, it would be that if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, this idea that at the bottom you have the basic remember and understanding, and then you move up it toward higher order skills, understanding, analyzing, evaluating, creating. It also sort of aligns well with using extrinsic at the bottom up toward intrinsic at the top. And I think that also goes back to what we were talking about before about how online learning has really taken off around knowledge transfer, compliance, policies, procedures. It's done really well at the bottom part, remembering, understanding where extrinsic motivation has been most helpful. But now, as we try to move on sort of the softer skills, leadership, innovation, things where you need to create, evaluate, analyze, we need to think more about intrinsic motivation. And on intrinsic motivation, there's a number of theories here as well. Again, from Deci and Ryan, the same folks, they came up with the self-determination theory. And to boil it down, essentially, there's three main drivers of intrinsic motivation. The first is relatedness, so connectedness with others, thinking of yourself as a social being. Certainly a lot of social psychology principles that would apply here as well. The second is mastery. So you do want to feel like you're making progress toward a goal. I think that's something that gamification does well at is, you see your progress, you feel like you're getting better, you see the mastery. And then finally is autonomy, which I think came out a lot in our conversation about ANDRAGOGY. You need to have control of your own learning. It needs to be your choice. Just adding that choice element will help people be more intrinsically motivated. And this is really the framework that I'll use as we talk about motivation, engagement, gamification practices, is which of these does it drive? So let's transition a little bit to gamification. So I want to start with a question, and it always seems like kind of an obvious question, but I don't think it is actually, which is, what is gamification? So I'd love if you could take a moment in the question box and just kind of give your best definition for what do you think gamification is. Not necessarily what, how do you do it, but just a, kind of a dictionary definition, if you will. Okay, so we're getting a couple come in here. So, okay, so yeah, I like, so some around defining a goal, application of game elements to, what's the rest of that? In a non-game context, interactions with the learner, challenging yourself at every level, making things fun. I like that sort of, how do we make things fun? So just to help, put us all in one place, and I think in some ways start to challenge some of the definitions. The definition I'm going to use is the application of game elements and design techniques to drive engagement. And I think part of this in my definition that's very explicit is I'm not defining which elements. So it's just, game designers have done a great job creating engaging games, whether they be video games, card games, casino games, social mobile games. And we as learning designers want to learn from that. We want to learn what they've done, how they're able to get people addicted to Candy Crush, how we can apply those same principles to get people addicted to a positive outcome. And I want to try that. That worked so well with the Padlet. I want to try one more, if you would humor me, and take a moment to think about, well, what are those techniques? So think about the games that you've played, whether it be card games, video games, casino games, sports, mobile games, the Candy Crushes of the world. What do they do in that game to keep you addicted, engaged, motivated? Let's do the same thing and pull those together. And then what we'll talk about for the rest of the conversation is, well, how can we apply all of those techniques to online learning? Okay, so a couple coming in here, and we'll try to come up with a codification as they come in. But leveling up, exploration, ease of entry, so tutorial, getting people kind of onboarding, challenging, another ease of entry.
I see some self and group, some social elements that can be fun, collaborating.
Okay, so I'll put social in the upper right here. Leveling, I'll put leveling in the bottom with rewards.
Yeah, I see rewards, ability to announce success. It's almost like feedback, that instant gratification knowing you've mastered something.
Another feedback, reinforcement. So definitely noticing some of the instructional designer in us coming out. I mean, even the terminology we're using with the ANDRAGOGY is similar. And that's certainly my hope. Sense of mastery. I love it.
Trophy hunting.
True.
Yep. Rules.
Oh, yeah, I think that, yeah, having a clear system. I think I saw that somewhere else too. Resources scarce, limited in number, so your virtual currency.
Fun sound.
Similar to the rules, in fact. Oh, interesting. So let me put the leveling, let's see, over here. I think the currency, a lot of good ones here. Sense of mastery, achievable challenge. Oh, wow, they're going down. There's a lot down here too. Social challenge, rich feedback, competition, rapid feedback, time-bounded. Never-ending.
Yeah, there's this theme of endlessness that we're seeing. Never a wrong path, just new ways to achieve a goal. Keeping the experience at the edge of capacity, right level of challenge.
Oh, I like that. There's some really good stuff here. There's a lot of, I think, thinking here that there's some different approaches that I didn't see in the in-person session. I like this. And I see people already thinking about the connections to learning. I like this a lot. Okay. So I think what we've all come up with today is actually one of the best. I've kind of done this in different formats. This is one of the best sets that I've seen, because I really think it goes much deeper than kind of what I've heard from some, in the past, or at least in passing conversation, having done this a couple times now. What I usually see is more things like progress. So I do see someone here, but I think even the nuances of how they're worded, but a lot around progress. So a lot around leveling up, gates and triggers, sort of having to get through a system of rules to progress. So I think those are right. I also often see a lot around rewards and achievements. So badges, points, trophies, and I see some of that here. I think those are all key elements to reward that progress. And then competition. And actually, I do say here, okay, competition, challenging. But I like how some people said kind of challenging me, more intrinsic or more personally challenging. Oh, here down here, there's some competition I see that folks shared. So leaderboards and rankings. So these subpoints are really how I see this implemented in online learning. It's leaderboards, rankings, points, badges, gates, triggers, levels. And when we're in the online learning space, so we're constantly integrating with other platforms, being asked questions about our capabilities. And what makes me maybe sad is sort of what prompted me to pull this together is that usually the conversation is about these things. And I'm really happy to see that's not where it went in the Padlet. But when people ask, hey, does NovoEd support gamification? And we do, but they usually say, well, what do you mean? Tell us more. They say, well, do you have points and you have badges and leaderboards? And yes, we do, because I think there are applications where you want to use that, but gamification can be so much more. And so one thing I wanted to do was actually go talk to my game designer friends. So I'm based here in Silicon Valley. I live, just a few blocks from Zynga, and I have a lot of friends who are product managers, game designers in the gaming space. And so I interviewed a handful of them to ask what they thought. So what do you use to engage people? And a couple themes that appeared. So one, which I saw here as well, is a system of basic rules and behaviors. I really geeked out with some of my friends about this. They described it like math systems. Like you're creating a very small set of rules that can that can be used to create infinitely complex environments. The second was this core game loop, and this seemed to be one of the most important aspects of game design, was creating, I think it also gets back to the system of rules, but you have a loop. And this gets back to that engagement loop that I sort of postulated earlier, that engagement is this motivation with this feedback. And they were essentially saying game design is exactly the same. We'll dive into that. A challenging but achievable, so focus on the difficulty level. And I saw a lot of comments there. And a key point here was how it's not fixed. So in fact, they were saying that a game like Candy Crush will get more or less difficult depending on what they want you to do, if they want you to win or not. So they may intentionally make the first 4 games harder, and then it will ease it up toward the 5th and 6th because they've done data analysis to show that after the 8th game, people fatigue and give up. And so they really want you to win before that, but they don't want you to win too early because then it feels too easy. I also heard from a couple of friends that depending on time of day and how long you've played, that in one sort of RPG role-playing type game, if you've been playing for more than, he didn't tell me the hours, but a couple hours, they would start making it progressively more difficult because they want you to stop playing and come back the next day. They would also incentivize like bonus points for each sign-in of a day. They want people to break it up so they don't get fatigued from the game. And it's like playing a song too many times, you get sick of it after a while. So they want you to stop. Progress toward mastery, that was definitely a key one that I think we think a lot about in gamification. Predictable but not deterministic. Social, which I'll talk about in a moment. Social cooperation. So definitely competition was important. A lot of people use competition, but the best games seem to use competition within a team. And so they said actually it's more about creating the feeling of the team and the in-group. Sometimes you have to create out-group competition to strengthen the group. And they said a lot of it is more about that. It's about the social connections than the competition. And a couple of people used intrinsic motivation, not everyone, but I definitely, when they were describing kind of what they tried to do, I noticed this theme that they were actually trying to steer me toward the intrinsic stuff. And no, it's not just about points and badges. One of my friends, this is Bert, he's a game designer at Super Evil Megacorp. Oh, the coolest name of a company. And he had this really great analogy that I wanted to share. He said good game design is a lot like music, and he actually made this case that the same principles apply to music and art and other forms of entertainment as well, which is that you have this sort of slow build up, you get people excited, you really get people hooked. They know something's going to come. They know, in this case, they know there's a drop coming, but you don't know when. You think it's going to come, and it doesn't. And then there's that drop, that moment when everyone dances, gets excited, and then you repeat, right? Then he actually said there's a lull, just like in games, you'll have a moment where people can sort of catch their breath. If it's a fighting game, there'll be a moment where you get a break to regroup, and then it continues. He said the same loop, how you'll see it 2-3 times in popular music, is the same thing they apply in game design. Another piece that I mentioned is this idea of predictable but not deterministic. And there's a lot of research here around reinforcement and social psychology. If you think about sort of Pavlovian response, an animal touches a trigger, gets a pellet of food. But also if you're sort of punishing your pet for urinating on the lawn, or you're trying to potty train someone, you don't want to do it a fixed ratio, every nth response, and nor do you want it to be a fixed time. You actually want there to be this variable component, where maybe on average every X instance, but you want it to be different. And that dramatically increases the number of responses and the ability to train people. And it turns out that that's very true in learning as well, and trying to engage and motivate. So one of the challenges that I see in a lot of gamification, kind of points, badges, leaderboards online, is they make it very deterministic. In fact, it becomes very easy to game. And I say that the way most people do it in a negative way, to game the system, but that's exactly what they've done. They've created a system specifically to try to get you to game it, because you know exactly how to earn that point. You know exactly how to comment on the forum 30 times to get your 30 points. And part of what this leads to is, we were talking to one of our customers at Dynamic Results, and he likened it to the Las Vegas phenomenon. He said his point was it works really, really well in short doses. And that's part of the problem, is we try it out and we love the response. And you, like a casino game, you get people to just stay all night long until they're broke, and then fly home dehydrated. But his point was that that's not what you have to do for learning, that we need to think long-term. We want to keep people engaged, not just for the duration of the course. And I think part of the problem is there's been this trend toward micro-learning, which by itself is a good thing. I think it's good to make learning chunked, easily digestible, atomic units. You can string them together. People can learn when it's appropriate for them. But part of the problem of kind of microfying learning is that you've got people that are driving engagement for very short periods of time. And that's not going to drive the best outcomes. You've got to think about the longer term learning objectives, not the single 4 to 10 minute module. And so back to this core loop. So this is what I had posited before around engagement. And what I learned from the game designers is it's very similar what they do. And this is an example of a Simpsons game called Tapped Out, where it's very similar to a lot of the Zynga games, the farm builds of the world, where you get a currency or some sort of experience points. You use those points to build something. With that building, with those farms, with those, SimCity, you then earn more points. And then during this, there'll be some break, there's some challenge, some monster comes, some enemy comes, you use the points to fight that. That helps deplete your points, but then you get a repeat. And this is really what they think about. Here's another version with Clash of Clans. You can see it adds in the battle. And in fact, everyone I talked to could draw this out very clearly for their game. And it turns out it's not just games. It's also, this is Starbucks, specifically the point system that you get. It's very much now think about your reward system for frequent flyer miles for airlines. The same principle is applied frequently. And, I come from a product background, and so I actually found these seem very similar to product design. And this is from Carnival. They put together a great blog post on this. And they said there's 3 principles to really good mobile app design. And it turns out they are very similar to what we talked about around gamification and learning. Designing for the moment of need, making it clear, applied. So I think this gets to the applicability piece. Making it proactive. So this gets to some of those ideas for engagement. So messaging, having people reach out, sending them a notification, bringing in some of the peer components. People like knowing what their friends are doing, having that social activity. Time tasks. So again, a lot around timing and how much time you want to give people to do a task. And then I thought it was really interesting, they actually said, sweat the core loop. You've got to think about that reward and input system. And that's very true as we think about online learning courses as well. You think, well, what is that system? What is the loop that you want your learners to get in? So let's talk a little more about the science that underlies some of these. And a principle here is gamification is not good or bad. It really depends on how you're applying it. And one of the key principles of game design that came up was around flow. And it's this idea that you have a certain level of skill, a certain level of challenge, and you've got to be right in this sort of center zone here. If it's too hard, you get anxious. If it's too easy, you get bored. And this applies to work, and it also applies to learning. You want people to be right in the zone where they feel engaged, they feel confident, they feel like they can master it. They feel autonomy towards the learning to progress along that path. And this actually got me thinking back to some of my kind of educational background around the zone of proximal development by Vygotsky. And the idea here is that you need to be in this, not the comfort zone, so not too easy, not stuff you already know and that you can easily do by yourself. That you can learn anywhere. And it can't be too difficult. You get anxious, so very similar to flow. You be right in the middle, something that you can do with a little bit of support, that you can do with some scaffolding. And very similar to what we saw around the game comments I'm looking at here on my other screen, finding that right challenge, kind of giving people the right scaffolding, the right onboarding. So it seems like in learning and game design and app design, it's about finding that right spot. And I think there's a lot of interesting work around adaptive learning now in these micro pieces for how can you give people the right challenge at the right time. But you can also do this in more social contexts by getting people to work together. And we'll talk more about that. So I mentioned before this idea of gaming, that you don't want people to feel like they're gaming the system. You want them to try to create these perceptual maps, do higher order thinking, create these thematic relationships, so create long-term memory. And what we know about the way the brain forms long-term memory is that it doesn't do well under anxiety. And as a result, what his research has found is that if you're playing a game, you start to think too much about the rules of the game, the system of the game. You think about that reward loop, and you're not applying that energy toward the learning. And so there's a similar theory by Sweller on cognitive load theory, which is that at any point in time, your kind of brain is being used for three things. The first is the germane load. So this is what you're using for processing and constructing schemas in long-term memory. So this is sort of the ideal. You're using it to create mental models, constructs, schemas. There's a part of it, your brain, that's focused on intrinsic load. So this is the inherent difficulty or irreducible problem complexity. It's a hard problem. You've got to think through it in order to even get to that germane, to even figure out what the answer or what is the long-term objective. But then there's this extrinsic load. And this is all of your mental energy, cognitive energy, focused on things that essentially don't matter. They're distractions, they're artificial, they're above and beyond. And this is something that we're constantly working on reducing and learning, because if you're putting people in a new learning platform, you don't want that to create cognitive overhead and an unnecessary cognitive load. You want to make something as easy and understandable as possible. We saw a lot of those components before, and if you think about the idea of flow, we want to reduce that extrinsic load. And that's where games can be tricky, because in some ways that is extra mental energy you have to put that is not necessary for the problem, and it's not necessary for long-term memory. And so again, not saying it's bad, but needs to be done in moderation. And there's another piece by Alfie Cohen, who's a researcher on education, parenting, adult behavior, very prolific, he's written 14 books. And he focuses a little bit on the K-12 audience, a lot around parenting, but has gotten more in adult learning. And he's found that extrinsic rewards actually inhibit the intrinsic motivation, and it can cause you to lose interest in the thing that you'll be being rewarded for doing. And Jensen, who we mentioned earlier, found something very similar. He said, paradoxically, the more demotivating the environment is, the learners seek more rewards, and vice versa. And so not only do you have this idea that these additional rewards, these gaming systems, are adding cognitive overhead, but they may actually be causing people to lose interest in the underlying system, because they think to themselves, oh, I'm doing this for the reward. There's some attribution bias that's happening here, where you go, well, even sort of cognitive dissonance, like, well, I'm getting rewarded, so therefore I must be doing it for the reward, and therefore I must not enjoy doing it. And the conclusion of this then, kind of from the research that I found, is that the rewards must slowly be replaced with more meaningful elements, that you can use the rewards to sort of spur engagement. And in fact, that's what we recommend to our clients as well. We just had a gamification brainstorming session, and we realized that gamification can be really good to sort of prime the pump, to get things going or spur interest in something. Basically use the extrinsic motivation to get people doing it. Once they're doing it, once they're in that game loop that we talked about, you want to start pulling it back, so that now they stay doing it because of intrinsic motivators, because they see their path toward autonomy, or they see their path toward mastery, because they feel like they're doing it because they choose to. So you see this autonomy piece is sort of the direct opposite of this interest piece that we talked about with Alfie and Eric, which is, if you feel like you're doing it for reward, you don't feel that autonomy, you don't feel that intrinsic piece. So we're seeing these kind of all tie together. And Scott Nicholson, who's a professor of game design, so actually very focused on game design and development in Ontario, and the head of the Brantford Game Network Lab, said exactly this, that rewards need to be replaced with more meaningful elements. And he gave some examples like narrative freedom, choosing your own paths, playful activities, opportunity to reflect, needing more authentic engagement between participants in the external text, removing the gamification layers. And then Clark and Mayer, so Ruth Clark's a PhD in educational psychology, runs her own consulting firm, and Richard Mayer, probably the most prolific writer, 390 books on this topic, publications, and a professor of psychology at University of California. They really kind of, I think, hit it where rubber hits the road, which is gamification shouldn't be about these points and badges that we discussed, but they should be about role play, simulation, interactive modules, of taking those same tactics, but using the educational constructs that we would use in an in-person workshop. And so let's talk about what those are. What have we seen work? And we're basing these on a number of our clients, partners. We really work in corporate training at large companies like GE and Comcast, but also for educational organizations, training firms, consultancies that are training third-party individuals and organizations, like some top business schools, Stanford, Darden, UC Berkeley, nonprofits like Ashoka, and then consulting firms like IDEO and Deloitte. So these are really the best practices. And the first thing that we've seen consistently, and also shows up in the data, this is data by one of our partners, Agreed, is that people want to learn socially. That's how they choose to do it on their own. And as we've seen, you really want to meet learners where they are and in the context they're used to. And if you ask people, how do you learn? The vast majority, 69%, go to boss, mentor, peers. Then people start doing on-demand, they're searching social or browsing resources, searching the internet. And there's a few other things that I truncated here. Sort of last and probably least is they go to their LMS. So they look at what HR is saying. They don't want to be told what to learn. They want to ask it when they need it and find it on demand. And we've done a number of presentations on social learning as well. Given time, I won't try to summarize it all here. But needless to say, suffice to say, there's a lot of great research around the importance of social learning, around the connectedness, relatedness, motivation, creating some idea of felt accountability that because you're with peers, you want to look good, and there's certainly the social motivators there. And I even think that when we talk about the adaptive learning, working with peers is one of the best ways to be adaptive, because you're working with a person who is basically directly adapting to you, depending on your understanding. That will guide where the team or the group conversation goes. So if you're interested in this topic, check out our resources page, novoed.com/resources. We've got several blog posts and webinars on the same topic. And so one of the key pieces to this is to create public profiles for social recognition. And so you can see some of the gamification elements. This idea that your work is public, that your badges are public, you can apply in other meaningful ways as well, like creating portfolios of people's work. If I can go on and see Drew, what classes he's taken, how he did in those courses, what feedback he's received, and probably most importantly, see his work product, that's going to cause Drew to be more engaged and more motivated, because he knows that there's this social recognition. In some ways, there's this positive peer pressure. And this is something that we encourage, and as our platform supports it, but we encourage all of our customers to take advantage of these profiles as really a very meaningful way to gamify. Rather than points, badges, and leaderboards, use the social motivators, the same thing that keeps people engaged in social networks. Another key piece that pulling in from the gamification is you do have to make sure that there's a clear track. And this is often a challenge because you want people to feel autonomy. So you want people to feel like they can go at their own pace and in their own order, but you also want to make sure people feel that mastery, that they're moving toward a goal. You want to make sure that they're not getting lost, and that there's too much cognitive overhead or extrinsic load by trying to navigate the course. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges in course design, is try to trade off these two. And something that we've really designed our platform to accommodate, to create an easy to follow path that'll show you what's next for you, but at the same time, providing different branches and paths that you can go down. So as you're designing your course and thinking about really doing your back planning and the syllabus design, I think this is one of the most important pieces. It's clear to know where you are and how you get to the end, but there's not just one path you can take. Related to that, of course, is showing progress. It's got to be transparent where the learners are. And I think this is often done to one extreme or the other. Either it's kind of hidden until the end, so you don't really know if you're going to pass a class or get a certificate with distinction, or it's done to the extreme where you see every little thing you do gets a point. So you got to be somewhere in the middle. People need to know where they are when they want to know, but you don't necessarily need to make it front and center. And so finding a place that learners can go on demand and get a sense for how they're doing. You don't necessarily need leaderboards, although it is helpful to have some social, if you will, kind of where you stand relative to others. So if you have 75 points, but you realize everyone else in the class has 200, that's different than you have 75 and everyone else in the class has 50. So having some milestones and guide marks can be helpful. Likewise, same idea of kind of where you're going throughout the course at all points. So having these self-paced components can be valuable as well. And a piece to this is people can learn when and where they want. But what we find works really well is to do this like semi-synchronous model where you've got a cohort working together at a similar pace. So maybe it's a 4 to 6 week leadership development course. But within that, you allow people to watch videos at their own time. Having people come together to watch a webinar like this, is challenging. And it can be really valuable, but at the same time, if you've got thousands of learners in a course, trying to pick that time is going to be challenging. And so thinking about how to break up your course into some elements that can be done self-paced and some elements that can be done collaboratively, or at least in small cohorts, we found to be a key factor in success. And likewise, a piece of this is collaboration, not competition. And this gets back to some of the game elements we talked about, that creating teams, working together as a community. It's helpful if maybe you have a little competition with another team, but the learning comes from each other. And we know this from learning as well, that if you're in a small group of peers and you're collaborating and discussing, that's how you're going to share. You're going to share your ideas. You're going to ask each other for help. You're going to get that feedback, that mentorship. Sort of the what was it, the 2 Sigma, or the 2 Sigma problem from Bloom. Like, how do you get the same outcome as one-to-one tutoring? And what he found was, well, you've got to do peer-to-peer learning. You've got to do groups, because the group can adapt and help each other along the way. And a piece to this that we found to be really effective is allowing people to choose their own teams. And in our platform, there's this context. We can assign teams algorithmically based on geography, time zone, interest, role, but we can also have people form their own teams. And there's a huge benefit to doing that. So this is something we've done some studies on. And if you ask people to form their own team versus you assign a team to them sort of manually, you see dramatically higher. It's almost double the engagement level in the self-formed teams. And part of this is there's this idea of self-accountability. That when you form that team, you said, hey, will you work with me, John? And John says, yeah, sure, I'd love to work with you. If you then back out of the course, if you disengage, if you drop out, you've sort of made that social commitment to your peer. You sort of have a social contract. And that keeps people motivated, the idea of not disappointing your peers. And Rao and Bob Sutton at Stanford have done a lot of research on this topic. And they recently wrote in a book called Scaling Up Excellence, about how you need to drive self-accountability, so feeling of accountability to your peers to drive intrinsic motivation and engagement. And they actually mentioned NovoEd specifically in that book as having a lot of techniques to do that. We did find, by the way, that there is a peak size, so we do recommend capping size of teams. Roughly 7 was the right number, and it varies depending on the context. This isn't a one-size-fits-all rule. But across, we did 10,000 students in 8 courses. We found 7 was the right number. And what you want those teams to do then is work on something applied, real. We saw that consistently in the kind of ANDRAGOGY conversations. It has to be what they want to do. It has to be applied, relevant to their work. And the nice thing about letting people form their own teams and then work on a project is now that team can also choose the topic of their project. And this is certainly helpful from an autonomy perspective, to be able to let people choose to work on a project related to their day-to-day job. But the next thing we find that's really helpful is to have people share that work with each other. And this gets back to the very first point around transparency, around visibility of work. But you also start to see people, students in the course, other learners, providing feedback. So if it's a leadership development course and there's a unit on feedback, and every team is come together to come up with a approach to giving feedback, and they share that with the community, what's going to happen is you're going to get discussion on that. People are going to say, no, that didn't work for me. I tried that, but my peer sort of laughed at me or thought it was kind of funny. And someone else will say, yeah, I tweaked it a little bit and actually said the impact this had was X, and that seemed to work more effectively. You kind of get this conversation going. And where we've seen this really effective, one of our clients, IDEO, does a number of design thinking courses and creativity courses. And part of what makes the class so interesting is they pick a very broad discussion prompt. Some of them can be silly, like rethink gum, and some of them can be more focus on education, like, how might we educate more people in Brazil? And they'll leave it fairly open-ended and allow teams to decide what that means to them, to find something that's personally motivating to them, and then work together on that project and share it. And then once they've shared that, it's starting to get this informal feedback. So everyone can go in, watch the video, look at their work, click through their slides, and give comments, give feedback, ask questions. And it's just creating this dialogue that becomes really valuable. If individuals feel like they're creating work and putting it into a black hole, they're not going to be motivated. They're not going to get that. Think back to that game loop. I think this is starting to get that piece where the loop of the class can be learn something, apply that learning to something personally meaningful and relevant, share that with the community, view other people's work to kind of see how they did it, see other best practices, get alternative ways of thinking, get feedback from others on your work, so you learn a little more from that feedback. Then I think the instructional design should sort of pair that with some additional learning, maybe an additional lecture, some additional chunks, and then you apply that learning to either improve or kind of workshop further on your project or submit another project. I guess you can't see my hands and my kind of gesticulating here, but you can see this loop: learn, apply, get feedback, learn, apply. And you want that to be the loop, that people are seeking this feedback. That's what people want, is this social recognition, these comments, and that's why they want to do good work. That's why they want to return to the learning environment. And you can do this informally with informal kind of formative feedback. You can also do it more formally with peer-to-peer feedback, with direct mentors, and this could be formative or summative. And sometimes it's helpful to actually have that idea of a rubric and have people rate 7 people anonymously, so you can really get a more quantitative measure of your performance. And then having meaningful discussions. One thing we see in too many classes is people throw up a discussion board and then want to say, leave comments and we'll give you points for contributing, and it sort of becomes inauthentic, unmeaningful. And what we rather see is that discussions are integrated in with the learning, so they can be more meaningful, more relevant, more timely. And people aren't posting because they have to or because they were told to go off at the end of the unit, but because they do it in the middle of the unit, as they have a question, as they have a thought. One of the ideas we've seen to help improve this is the idea of course champions or catalysts. And this came up in a lot of our original courses, the large MOOCs, but has now been applied in even sort of medium-sized corporate classes where you don't want to have a facilitator constantly managing the course. You need to sort of have a life of its own. And having catalysts, people who may be alumni of the course or peers, come in and give comments or like other people's work, can help spark that. So again, to this idea of game loop, there is good reason to catalyze that loop, to maybe put some extrinsic motivation, or in this case, seed the tip jar, if you will, with some comments. And so we've experimented in a couple of classes, and here's some we did with Philanthropy University. We found that when we started doing the course champions, engagement in the course basically doubled, especially at the low end. It sort of was going down as toward the class, and then it changed the trend upward. So this starts to catalyze, to seed that tip jar, to get that loop going. And then from this idea of meaningful badges. Far too often, I see this on websites now, I leave one comment and I get an email saying, congratulations, you've got the newcomer badge, or congratulations, you've left 5 comments, you have the commenter badge. And what happens is they start to feel not meaningful. If the badges aren't meaningful, you don't value them yourself, and you certainly don't respect other people who have them. And I think this is a challenge to education. There's a very, very meaningful badge in education, which is the degree, but that's clearly too large, too bundled. It takes 4+ years to get. It's very expensive. But at the other extreme, you probably don't want badges for every single lecture, and even for every single course can be overwhelming. When I look at resumes in LinkedIn now and I see every single course someone's taken, there needs to be some element of aggregation that is valuable as a signal to people. I think that's a challenge we need to think about as a learning community, is what is the right level for those badges? Is it a set of courses? And I think what we're finding is it's the certificate program. It's 4 to 6 courses, maybe 8, on a single topic where you can just demonstrate mastery. At the end of that, do a major project. And we see this actually with a lot of the MOOC providers. I think the move towards the specialization, micro degrees, credentials. So I like where the industry is moving, and I think we need to do that in corporate training and adult learning as well. So what we found with all these techniques pulled together is dramatically higher engagement. And I think part of what my point here is that the gamification elements can be done in a more sophisticated way through teams, through feedback, through commenting. And what we found in a number of studies, this was a study by Chuck Easley, 22 times higher engagement by leveraging these peer-to-peer social intrinsic motivators, the self-accountability, autonomy, and mastery, as opposed to the more extrinsic, more self-paced points, badges, leaderboards. And we also see this as well with engagement metrics in terms of completion rate and a number of sign-ins. So with that, I'll say the way I summarize, this is a work in progress, and we're still thinking about this, but what I'm finding is we need as a community to go beyond points, badges, and leaderboards. We need to think more about cooperation and teamwork as opposed to just competition. I think leaderboards can be valuable from a relative standing perspective, but not from a trying to move up. We need to focus on intrinsic motivators, the autonomy, relatedness, and mastery, as opposed to extrinsic points and badges. We need to think about reinforcement schedules and that core loop of the course. How do we get people back in? How do we provide that feedback in the signpost? And finally, finding the right difficulty. So we're within the flow, we're within the zone of proximal development to keep people from getting demotivated, but also the right level of difficulty. So I appreciate everyone joining. We'll send out a copy of the slides, and I'm more than happy to share some of the research. Some of the people I mentioned are happy to share some of their work or a bibliography. Shoot me an email. It's Greg@NovoEd. And of course, if you're interested in doing any of this within your organization, would love to get you connected to our consulting team, or if you're looking at a platform, would love to connect you to our solution consulting team there as well. So I'll stick around if there are any questions. I know we just eclipsed our time, so feel free to head out. I'm sorry for taking your time, but I appreciate everyone joining. Thank you.